Question 1. The control framework reveals that Yakult is implementing a new customer relationship management (CRM) system. A critical data migration task involves transferring existing customer contact information from an older database to the new system. The IT team has flagged that the migration process is taking longer than anticipated, and there is pressure to complete it within the original deadline to avoid impacting upcoming marketing campaigns. A junior data analyst suggests proceeding with the migration using the data as is from the old system, assuming it is accurate to meet the deadline. A senior data manager proposes a more cautious approach, pausing the migration to conduct a sample-based verification of the data's accuracy against original customer records before proceeding with the full transfer, which approach best upholds Yakult's commitment to data integrity and regulatory compliance. Option A. Pause the migration to conduct a sample-based verification of the data's accuracy against original customer records before proceeding with the full transfer. Option B. Proceed with the migration using the data as is from the old system to meet the deadline. Option C. Inform the marketing team that the deadline cannot be met and delay the migration until all data is perfectly validated, regardless of the impact on campaigns. Option D. Expedite the migration process by automating data checks, but do not manually verify the data. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the migration using the data as is from the old system to meet the deadline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with the long-term implications of data integrity and regulatory compliance. Yakult, as a consumer-facing company, must uphold the highest standards of data accuracy to maintain public trust and adhere to relevant regulations concerning product information and consumer safety. The decision-making process must prioritize accuracy and compliance over expediency. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented review process that verifies the accuracy of the data against established sources before implementation. This aligns with the fundamental principles of data governance and regulatory adherence, which mandate that all information disseminated to the public or used in internal decision-making must be accurate and verifiable. Specifically, this approach upholds the spirit of regulations that require transparent and truthful representation of product information, preventing potential misinterpretations or misleading claims. It also supports internal quality control mechanisms designed to prevent errors from propagating through the system. An incorrect approach that bypasses verification to meet a tight deadline would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would directly contraindicate regulatory requirements for data accuracy and could lead to the dissemination of incorrect information, potentially impacting consumer choices and Yakult's reputation. Such an approach also undermines internal control systems designed to ensure data integrity, creating a precedent for cutting corners. Another incorrect approach, which relies solely on the assumption that the source data is correct without independent validation, is also flawed. While the source may be generally reliable, errors can occur. Failing to perform due diligence in verifying critical data points before integration into a new system represents a lapse in professional responsibility and a potential breach of data governance principles. This can lead to the propagation of existing errors, making them harder to detect and correct later. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core objective and any constraints, g. deadlines. 2. Assess the potential risks associated with different courses of action, particularly concerning data accuracy and regulatory compliance. 3. Prioritize regulatory and ethical obligations over short-term operational pressures. 4. Develop a plan that incorporates necessary verification steps, even if it requires adjusting timelines or resource allocation. 5. Document all decisions and the rationale behind them, ensuring accountability and a clear audit trail. Question 2. Regulatory review indicates that an employee at Yakult is considering investing in a publicly traded pharmaceutical company that is a competitor in a different geographical market. The employee believes this investment is unlikely to create a conflict of interest due to the distinct market focus. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Yakult employee to ensure compliance with best practices and internal policies? Option A. Invest in the competitor company, assuming no disclosure is needed as it is a different market and not a direct competitor in their primary region. Option B. Invest in the competitor company and then inform Yakult's compliance department of the investment after it has been completed. Option C. Proactively disclose the proposed investment to Yakult's compliance department for review and approval before making the investment. Option D. Invest in the competitor company and await any potential issues to arise before considering disclosure. Correct answer is D. Invest in the competitor company and await any potential issues to arise before considering disclosure. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employee of Yakult to navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain the integrity of their professional responsibilities while engaging in personal financial activities. The core challenge lies in ensuring that personal investments do not adversely affect their judgment or create an unfair advantage in their role at Yakult. Adhering strictly to the company's internal policies and any applicable regulatory frameworks governing financial conduct. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate any perceived or actual conflicts. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the proposed investment to Yakult's compliance department for review and approval. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and adherence to Yakult's internal policies on personal investments and conflicts of interest. This approach is the best professional practice because it aligns with the principle of avoiding conflicts of interest, a cornerstone of ethical conduct in regulated industries. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and likely letter of internal compliance policies that mandate disclosure of potential conflicts. By seeking pre-approval, the employee ensures that their personal financial activities are scrutinized against Yakult's ethical standards and regulatory obligations, thereby safeguarding the company's reputation and operational integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without any disclosure. This fails to uphold Yakult's internal policies on conflicts of interest and transparency. Ethically, it creates a significant risk of a perceived or actual conflict, undermining trust, and potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny if the investment were to influence the employee's professional duties. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the investment only after it has been made. This is a procedural failure and a breach of good faith. While disclosure is made, the timing is problematic as it bypasses the opportunity for proactive risk assessment and mitigation by Yakult's compliance team. This approach suggests a lack of understanding of the importance of preventative measures in conflict of interest management. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the investment is in a publicly traded company unrelated to Yakult's direct business operations, no disclosure is necessary. This demonstrates a failure to appreciate the broad scope of conflict of interest policies, which often extend beyond direct competitors or suppliers. The potential for even indirect influence or the appearance of impropriety necessitates a cautious and transparent approach, guided by company policy rather than personal interpretation. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to established policies. When faced with a situation that could potentially create a conflict of interest, the first step should be to consult Yakult's internal policies and procedures regarding personal investments and conflicts of interest. If the policy is unclear or the situation is complex, proactive communication with the compliance department is essential. This involves clearly articulating the proposed action and seeking guidance or formal approval. This proactive stance not only protects the individual employee, but also the organization from potential ethical and regulatory breaches. Question 3. Consider a scenario where Yakult's finance department is preparing its quarterly earnings report. There is significant market pressure for Yakult to demonstrate continued strong sales growth. A junior analyst notices a minor discrepancy in inventory valuation that, if corrected, would slightly reduce the reported profit margin for the quarter. The analyst is concerned about the potential impact on investor perception. Which of the following actions best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for Yakult? Option A. Inform management of the discrepancy and suggest that it be addressed in the following quarter's report to avoid negatively impacting current market perception. Option B. Immediately correct the inventory valuation discrepancy and ensure the revised figures are accurately reflected in the earnings report, regardless of the minor impact on the profit margin. Option C. Proceed with the original inventory valuation, assuming the discrepancy is immaterial and unlikely to be detected by external auditors. Option D. Highlight the positive sales figures prominently in the report and downplay the inventory valuation discrepancy in internal discussions. correct answer is B. Immediately correct the inventory valuation discrepancy and ensure the revised figures are accurately reflected in the earnings report, regardless of the minor impact on the profit margin. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a publicly listed company, must adhere to stringent financial reporting regulations. The pressure to meet market expectations for growth can create an environment where there's an incentive to misrepresent financial performance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all financial disclosures are accurate, transparent, and comply with the relevant regulatory framework, which in this case is the Yakult Hiring Assessment Test's specified jurisdiction. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of all financial data, seeking independent verification where necessary, and ensuring that any disclosures align strictly with the accounting standards and reporting guidelines applicable within the specified jurisdiction. This upholds the principles of financial integrity and regulatory compliance, preventing misleading statements to investors and the market. This approach is ethically sound and legally defensible, as it prioritizes truthfulness and adherence to established rules. An incorrect approach that involves selectively presenting positive data while omitting negative trends would be a failure of transparency and potentially misrepresents the true financial health of Yakult. This violates the ethical duty of honesty and the regulatory requirement for full and fair disclosure. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on management's optimistic projections without independent validation, risks perpetuating inaccuracies and failing to identify potential financial risks, thereby breaching the duty of due diligence. Finally, an approach that prioritizes short-term market sentiment over factual accuracy would be a severe ethical and regulatory lapse, as it undermines the integrity of financial markets and investor confidence. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements. They must then gather all relevant data, critically assess its accuracy and completeness, and compare it against established accounting principles and disclosure rules. Seeking advice from internal compliance teams or external auditors when uncertainties arise is crucial. The ultimate decision should always prioritize regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and the provision of accurate, unbiased information. Question 4. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a marketing role at Yakult has been presented with a scenario where a competitor has launched a new probiotic drink with claims that appear to be unsubstantiated by robust scientific evidence, potentially misleading consumers. The candidate is asked to advise Yakult on how to respond, considering both competitive strategy and ethical marketing principles. Which of the following approaches best assesses the candidate's suitability for Yakult's ethical and regulatory standards? Option A. Present a hypothetical scenario where a competitor makes potentially misleading claims and ask the candidate to propose a response that balances competitive strategy with Yakult's commitment to ethical marketing and regulatory compliance. Option B. Ask the candidate to predict potential future regulatory changes in the probiotic beverage market and how Yakult might adapt. Option C. Fabricate a scenario where Yakult is accused of a minor regulatory breach by a competitor and observe how the candidate reacts to the accusation. Option D. Inquire about the candidate's personal opinions on the taste and effectiveness of Yakult's products compared to competitors. The correct answer is A. Present a hypothetical scenario where a competitor makes potentially misleading claims and ask the candidate to propose a response that balances competitive strategy with Yakult's commitment to ethical marketing and regulatory compliance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge related to Yakult's commitment to ethical marketing and regulatory compliance within the hiring assessment context. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to accurately assess a candidate's understanding of Yakult's brand values and regulatory obligations, with the imperative to avoid misleading or deceptive practices during the assessment itself. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is both effective and ethically sound, reflecting Yakult's integrity. The correct approach involves presenting a hypothetical situation that requires the candidate to apply their understanding of Yakult's ethical marketing principles and relevant regulations to a plausible business scenario. This demonstrates their ability to think critically and make sound judgments in a way that aligns with Yakult's operational standards and legal requirements. The justification for this approach lies in its direct assessment of the candidate's practical application of knowledge, their ethical reasoning, and their understanding of compliance, all of which are crucial for a role at Yakult. It mirrors real-world decision-making processes where ethical considerations and regulatory adherence are paramount. An incorrect approach that involves fabricating a regulatory breach to test a candidate's reaction is professionally unacceptable. This is because it introduces an element of deception into the assessment process, which is fundamentally unethical and could be perceived as manipulative. It fails to accurately gauge a candidate's genuine ethical compass or their understanding of compliance, instead testing their response to a manufactured crisis. Furthermore, it risks creating a negative impression of Yakult as an employer, potentially alienating capable candidates. Another incorrect approach, which is to ask the candidate to speculate on hypothetical future regulatory changes without providing sufficient context or a clear objective, is also professionally unsound. This lacks a clear assessment objective and can lead to subjective and unreliable evaluations. It does not effectively measure the candidate's ability to navigate current regulatory landscapes or their problem-solving skills in a practical business context. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the candidate's personal opinions about Yakult's products without linking it to ethical marketing or regulatory compliance is inadequate. While understanding brand perception is valuable, it does not assess the critical skills of ethical decision-making and regulatory adherence that are essential for a role within Yakult's operational framework. This approach misses the core requirement of evaluating a candidate's professional judgment in a compliance-sensitive environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the assessment objective. 2. Designing scenarios that are realistic and relevant to the role and the company's operations. 3. Ensuring the assessment methods are ethical, transparent, and do not involve deception. 4. Focusing on evaluating the candidate's application of knowledge, critical thinking, and ethical reasoning in a professional context. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that a Yakult sales representative, while meeting with a key distributor, inadvertently learned that the distributor is also in discussions with a competitor regarding a significant promotional partnership that could directly impact Yakult's market share in that region. The distributor, who has a long-standing positive relationship with the Yakult representative, has not yet disclosed these discussions to Yakult. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Yakult sales representative? Option A. Continue the existing business relationship with the distributor as normal, hoping the distributor will eventually disclose the information or that the competitor's partnership will not materialize. Option B. Immediately report the information to their direct supervisor and the Yakult compliance department, outlining the potential impact on Yakult and the need for a strategic response. Option C. Discreetly gather more information about the competitor's proposed partnership before reporting it to ensure the information is complete. Option D. Advise the distributor that Yakult would be disappointed if they pursued a partnership with a competitor, attempting to dissuade them directly. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the information to their direct supervisor and the Yakult compliance department, outlining the potential impact on Yakult and the need for a strategic response. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between a desire to maintain positive relationships and the imperative to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Yakult, as a company, relies on the integrity of its employees to conduct business ethically. The dilemma arises when an employee is presented with information that, if acted upon without proper disclosure, could lead to a breach of trust and potentially violate internal Yakult policies or broader regulatory expectations regarding transparency and fair dealing. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation, ensuring that personal relationships do not compromise professional responsibilities. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent communication with the relevant internal stakeholders at Yakult. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and adherence to company policy. By proactively reporting the situation, the employee upholds the principle of integrity, which is fundamental to maintaining trust within the organization and with external parties. This aligns with the expectation that employees will act in the best interest of Yakult and report any potential conflicts or improprieties. This approach prioritizes compliance and ethical responsibility over personal convenience or the avoidance of potentially awkward conversations. An incorrect approach of ignoring the information or downplaying its significance would be a failure to uphold professional integrity. This could lead to a situation where Yakult is unaware of a potential issue, leaving the company vulnerable to reputational damage or regulatory scrutiny. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to resolve the issue independently without informing Yakult, could be seen as an attempt to circumvent established procedures and may inadvertently create further complications or breaches of policy. Both these approaches fail to meet the ethical obligation of transparency and the duty to act in the company's best interest. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest or ethical breaches, understanding relevant company policies and external regulations, and then choosing the course of action that best upholds these principles. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or the compliance department is a crucial step in ensuring that decisions are sound and defensible. Question 6. The analysis reveals that a supplier to Yakult has been found to be in breach of environmental regulations concerning waste disposal. While the immediate financial impact of switching suppliers would be significant, continuing with the current supplier poses potential reputational and legal risks for Yakult. Yakult's internal compliance team has flagged this issue. What is the most appropriate course of action for Yakult's management? Option A. Immediately terminate the contract with the supplier and initiate a search for a new compliant supplier, while also reporting the issue to relevant authorities. Option B. Focus on the financial implications of switching suppliers and negotiate a discount with the current supplier to offset any potential future fines Yakult might incur. Option C. Investigate the extent of the environmental breaches and their potential impact on Yakult's operations and reputation before making a decision, while also engaging with the supplier to understand their remediation plans. Option D. Continue the contract with the current supplier, but request the supplier to provide assurances that they will rectify the environmental breaches within a specified timeframe. The correct answer is A. Immediately terminate the contract with the supplier and initiate a search for a new compliant supplier, while also reporting the issue to relevant authorities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Yakult, as a publicly recognized brand, faces scrutiny not only for its product quality, but also for its business practices. The decision-maker must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with relevant regulations, which are paramount in maintaining public trust and avoiding legal repercussions. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation and a commitment to transparency and adherence to regulatory guidelines. This means gathering all relevant facts, consulting with legal and compliance departments, and making a decision that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance above short-term gains. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical standards expected of businesses operating within regulated industries. Specifically, it upholds the duty to act in the best interests of the company and its stakeholders, which includes adhering to all applicable laws and ethical codes. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns without proper investigation, prioritizing immediate cost savings, or avoiding potential disruption. This could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of consumer confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal or downplay the issue, which constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violates disclosure requirements. Such actions undermine the integrity of the company and expose it to significant legal and financial risks. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and its potential implications. This should be followed by gathering comprehensive information, assessing risks and benefits, consulting relevant stakeholders and experts, legal, compliance, and evaluating potential courses of action against ethical principles and regulatory requirements. The final decision should be documented, justifiable, and demonstrably aligned with the company's values and legal obligations. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that Yakult is reviewing its operational risk assessment framework. Which of the following approaches would best align with regulatory expectations for comprehensive risk management and proactive identification of potential issues? Option A. Relying solely on historical incident data to identify and quantify risks, assuming past events are the primary indicators of future threats. Option B, outsourcing the entire risk assessment process to an external firm without establishing internal oversight or integration with company operations. Option C, focusing exclusively on quantitative financial modeling to assess risks, prioritizing monetary impacts over other potential consequences. Option D, conducting a qualitative risk assessment that identifies potential hazards, their likelihood, and their potential impact on product safety and business operations. The correct answer is D, conducting a qualitative risk assessment that identifies potential hazards, their likelihood, and their potential impact on product safety and business operations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must ensure its risk assessment processes are robust and compliant with relevant guidelines. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method for assessing operational risks, considering the potential impact on product safety, consumer trust, and regulatory standing. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both comprehensive and aligns with established best practices. The correct approach involves a qualitative risk assessment that prioritizes identifying potential hazards and evaluating their likelihood and impact. This method is suitable because it allows for a nuanced understanding of risks, particularly those that may not be easily quantifiable, but can have significant consequences. This aligns with regulatory expectations for companies to proactively identify and manage risks to ensure product integrity and consumer safety. Ethical considerations also support this approach, as it demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible business practices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical incident data for risk assessment would be insufficient. This failure stems from its reactive nature. It only considers risks that have already materialized, potentially overlooking emerging or novel threats. This could lead to a lack of preparedness for future issues and a violation of the proactive risk management principles expected by regulators. Another incorrect approach, which relies exclusively on quantitative financial modeling for risk assessment, would also be professionally unacceptable. While financial implications are important, this method risks neglecting non-financial risks such as reputational damage, regulatory noncompliance, or product recalls, which can have severe consequences for Yakult. This narrow focus fails to capture the full spectrum of operational risks and may not meet the comprehensive risk management requirements mandated by regulatory frameworks. Finally, an approach that delegates the entire risk assessment process to external consultants without internal oversight would be flawed. While external expertise can be valuable, ultimate responsibility for risk management rests with Yakult's management. A complete delegation without internal engagement risks a lack of understanding of the company's specific operational context and can lead to recommendations that are not fully integrated or actionable, potentially creating compliance gaps. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to Yakult. This involves identifying the core principles of risk management expected by the relevant authorities. The next step is to evaluate different risk assessment methodologies against these principles, considering their ability to identify, analyze, and mitigate a broad range of potential risks. The chosen approach should be practical, scalable, and integrated into the company's overall governance structure, ensuring continuous monitoring and adaptation. Question 8. To address the challenge of evaluating candidates for a new role at Yakult, which approach would best ensure a fair and legally compliant hiring process, focusing on the candidate's potential to contribute to the company's objectives? Option A. Evaluating a candidate's general personality type and social media activity to gauge their cultural fit within Yakult. Option B. Measuring a candidate's perceived leadership potential through informal interviews and subjective observations of their demeanor. Option C. Assessing a candidate's specific technical skills and problem-solving abilities directly relevant to the responsibilities of the role at Yakult. Option D. Determining a candidate's suitability based on their educational background and previous work experience in unrelated industries. The correct answer is C. Assessing a candidate's specific technical skills and problem-solving abilities directly relevant to the responsibilities of the role at Yakult. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations, particularly in the context of a hiring assessment. Yakult, as a company, operates within a specific regulatory environment that dictates fair hiring practices. The challenge lies in designing an assessment that accurately measures a candidate's suitability for a role without introducing bias or violating any applicable employment laws or ethical guidelines. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is objective, relevant to the job, and non-discriminatory. The correct approach involves focusing on the candidate's demonstrable skills and competencies directly related to the job requirements at Yakult. This aligns with the principles of merit-based hiring, which is a cornerstone of fair employment practices and is often mandated by employment legislation. By assessing skills and competencies, the evaluation remains objective and directly relevant to the candidate's potential performance within Yakult, thereby minimizing the risk of unfair discrimination. This approach is ethically sound, as it treats all candidates equitably based on their professional capabilities. An incorrect approach that relies on subjective personality traits without a clear link to job performance is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to unconscious bias, where personal preferences or stereotypes influence hiring decisions, potentially violating anti-discrimination laws. Another incorrect approach that focuses on external factors unrelated to the candidate's ability to perform the role at Yakult, such as their social media presence or personal affiliations, is also ethically problematic and may contravene privacy regulations or create an unfair assessment environment. Such methods lack objectivity and can result in discriminatory outcomes, undermining the integrity of the hiring process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes job relevance and objectivity. This involves clearly defining the essential skills and competencies required for the role at Yakult, designing assessment methods that directly measure these attributes, and ensuring that the assessment process is applied consistently to all candidates. Regular review of assessment tools for potential bias and adherence to all relevant employment laws and ethical codes are crucial steps in maintaining a fair and effective hiring process. Question 9. The review process indicates that Yakult's current product development cycle is experiencing delays, impacting time to market. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline the quality assurance sign-off stages by reducing the number of mandatory checks and relying more heavily on historical data for validation. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately reduce the number of quality assurance checks and implement the reliance on historical data, as this is a common efficiency measure adopted by many companies in the sector. Option B. Focus on adopting the latest technological solutions for automated data analysis without a comprehensive review of how these technologies integrate with existing regulatory reporting requirements. Option C. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving a detailed risk assessment of each proposed change to quality assurance protocols, followed by pilot testing and validation against specific regulatory requirements before full integration. Option D. Prioritize the reduction of quality assurance personnel to expedite the sign-off process, assuming that the remaining staff can manage the workload with the proposed data reliance. The correct answer is C. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving a detailed risk assessment of each proposed change to quality assurance protocols, followed by pilot testing and validation against specific regulatory requirements before full integration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must ensure its internal processes, particularly those related to product development and quality control, align with established regulatory frameworks. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency and innovation with the imperative to maintain compliance and uphold ethical standards. A hasty or incomplete approach to process optimization could inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory requirements, impacting product safety, consumer trust, and the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement improvements that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based review of existing processes, identifying specific areas for improvement, and then proposing and implementing changes that demonstrably enhance efficiency and effectiveness without compromising regulatory adherence. This approach prioritizes a systematic and documented methodology, ensuring that any modifications are understood, validated, and integrated in a way that meets all applicable standards. This aligns with the fundamental principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate that companies operate with integrity and diligence in all aspects of their business. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without adequate consideration for regulatory impact would fail to uphold Yakult's responsibilities. This could lead to overlooking critical control points, inadequate validation of new procedures, or the introduction of practices that are not permissible under the relevant regulations. Such failures can result in product recalls, fines, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting industry best practices without a specific assessment of their applicability and compliance within Yakult's unique operational context and the specific regulatory environment it operates within. This can lead to the implementation of processes that are not suitable or may even conflict with local requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. This involves proactive engagement with compliance teams and legal counsel to ensure all proposed process changes are vetted against current laws and guidelines. The process should be iterative, with pilot testing and impact assessments conducted before full-scale implementation. A commitment to continuous improvement, coupled with a robust system for monitoring and auditing processes, is essential for maintaining both efficiency and compliance. Question 10. What factors determine the most appropriate approach for Yakult to optimize its probiotic beverage production processes while ensuring full compliance with relevant food safety and labeling regulations? Option A. The speed at which new technologies can be integrated into the production line, even if their long-term regulatory implications are not fully understood. Option B. A thorough assessment of how proposed process changes impact product safety, ingredient integrity, labeling accuracy, and adherence to all applicable food and beverage industry regulations. Option C. The perceived market demand for faster delivery times, which might necessitate a reduction in the stringency of quality assurance checks. Option D. The potential for significant cost savings and increased production volume, irrespective of minor deviations from current quality control protocols. The correct answer is D. The potential for significant cost savings and increased production volume, irrespective of minor deviations from current quality control protocols. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Yakult, as a food and beverage company, operates under stringent regulations concerning product quality, safety, and marketing claims. Process optimization, while aimed at efficiency, must never compromise these fundamental obligations. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for cost reduction and improved output with the non-negotiable requirements of regulatory compliance and consumer trust. A hasty or poorly considered optimization could lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and harm to consumers. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are rigorously tested against current regulatory standards and ethical considerations. This includes ensuring that any modifications to production, ingredient sourcing, or quality control do not violate Yakult's adherence to food safety laws, accurate labeling requirements, and responsible marketing practices. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of compliance by design, where regulatory adherence is integrated into the optimization process from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. This proactive stance minimizes risk and ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of consumer well-being or legal standing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact would fail by potentially compromising product integrity. For instance, substituting ingredients without thorough safety and regulatory approval could lead to non-compliance with food additive regulations or allergen labeling laws. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough validation could result in the introduction of new contaminants or a reduction in product shelf life, violating food safety standards and potentially leading to product recalls. A third incorrect approach that overlooks the ethical implications of process changes, such as reducing quality checks to save time, would undermine consumer trust and violate ethical principles of transparency and product quality assurance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all applicable regulations. This should be followed by a risk assessment for any proposed process change, evaluating potential impacts on product safety, quality, and compliance. Stakeholder consultation, including quality assurance, legal, and regulatory affairs teams, is crucial. Finally, any optimized process must undergo rigorous testing and validation to ensure it meets both efficiency targets and all regulatory and ethical requirements before full implementation. Question 11. The performance metrics show a significant increase in sales for Yakult's new probiotic drink, largely attributed to its marketing campaign highlighting enhanced immune support. However, internal discussions reveal that the scientific evidence supporting the extent of this immune enhancement is still developing and may not fully substantiate the strong claims made in the current advertising. A senior marketing manager is pushing to maintain the current campaign to capitalize on the sales momentum, arguing that the claims are generally accepted within the industry. What is the most appropriate course of action for a Yakult employee in this situation, considering the need to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Revise the marketing claims to be more general and less specific about immune enhancement, focusing instead on the overall health benefits of the probiotic, and continue the campaign with the revised messaging. Option B. Escalate the concern to the legal and compliance departments, providing all available information on the marketing claims and the supporting scientific evidence, and recommend a review to ensure compliance with advertising standards and ethical guidelines before continuing the campaign. Option C. Immediately halt all marketing related to immune support for the new product until definitive, robust scientific evidence is available to fully substantiate the claims, even if it means a significant drop in sales. Option D. Continue the current marketing campaign as is, as the sales performance indicates consumer acceptance and the claims are considered generally accepted within the industry. The correct answer is D. Continue the current marketing campaign as is, as the sales performance indicates consumer acceptance and the claims are considered generally accepted within the industry. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial performance with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Yakult, as a consumer-facing company, has a heightened responsibility to ensure its marketing and product claims are accurate and not misleading, especially when dealing with health-related products. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to overstate benefits, which could lead to regulatory scrutiny, reputational damage, and erosion of consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate this tension. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and adherence to regulatory guidelines, even when it might temporarily impact short-term performance metrics. This approach prioritizes accurate representation of product benefits, ensuring that all marketing claims are substantiated by robust scientific evidence and comply with relevant advertising standards. This aligns with the ethical imperative to provide consumers with truthful information and the regulatory requirement to avoid misleading advertising. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate performance metrics over factual accuracy would fail to uphold regulatory standards. Specifically, it would violate principles of truthful advertising and consumer protection, potentially leading to sanctions from regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on past marketing successes without considering current regulatory interpretations or evolving scientific understanding risks becoming outdated and non-compliant. This demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a failure to adapt to the dynamic regulatory landscape. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of applicable regulations and ethical codes. When faced with conflicting pressures, such as performance targets versus compliance, the framework should mandate seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments, rigorously verifying all claims against evidence, and prioritizing consumer welfare and regulatory adherence above all else. This proactive and principled approach safeguards both the company and its stakeholders. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates a slight, intermittent deviation in a key quality control parameter for a Yakult production line. This deviation is within historical acceptable variance, but has occurred more frequently in the last week. What is the most appropriate next step for the responsible Yakult employee? Option A. Continue monitoring the parameter, assuming the deviation is within acceptable historical limits and unlikely to pose a significant risk. Option B. Adjust the monitoring system's thresholds to reflect the recent trend, thereby bringing the parameter back within the newly defined acceptable range. Option C. Initiate a detailed investigation into the root cause of the deviation, cross-referencing with production logs, maintenance records, and relevant quality control protocols, and consult with the Quality Assurance Department. Option D. Immediately halt production on the affected line to prevent any potential non-compliance, regardless of the magnitude of the deviation. The correct answer is C. Initiate a detailed investigation into the root cause of the deviation, cross-referencing with production logs, maintenance records, and relevant quality control protocols, and consult with the Quality Assurance Department. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Yakult to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a judgment call regarding potential regulatory breaches. The challenge lies in distinguishing between minor operational fluctuations and significant indicators of noncompliance, which could have serious consequences for Yakult, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken are proportionate and aligned with regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based review of the monitoring system's output, cross-referencing it with Yakult's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes accuracy and due diligence. By seeking to understand the root cause of any anomalies and consulting with relevant internal departments and potentially external experts, the individual demonstrates a commitment to compliance and risk mitigation. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and to safeguard the company's adherence to the law and industry standards. Specifically, this would involve referencing the principles of good manufacturing practice, GMP, and any specific reporting requirements mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies overseeing food and beverage production in the jurisdiction. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost-saving measures without a comprehensive understanding of the underlying issue would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for potential regulatory breaches and an overemphasis on short-term financial gains, which can lead to long-term, more significant costs if noncompliance is discovered. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the data altogether due to its perceived minor nature, represents a failure in risk management and a breach of the duty of care. This could be seen as a willful blindness to potential issues, which is contrary to the proactive compliance expected of employees. Finally, an approach that involves making assumptions without verifying them against factual data or regulatory requirements is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of rigor and can lead to incorrect conclusions and actions, potentially exposing Yakult to regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data collection and analysis. This should be followed by an assessment of potential risks and impacts, considering both regulatory and business perspectives. Consultation with subject matter experts and relevant stakeholders is crucial. Finally, decisions should be documented, and actions taken should be clearly justifiable based on the evidence and regulatory requirements. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates that a batch of Yakult produced today experienced a minor temperature fluctuation during a critical processing stage, falling slightly outside the specified range for a brief period. The deviation was not significant enough to cause immediate visible spoilage, and the batch appears otherwise normal. However, standard procedure dictates that such deviations must be logged and reported to the quality assurance team for review. You are the operator responsible for this batch. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Adjust the recorded temperature data to fall within the specified range before logging and reporting. Option B. Assume the deviation is insignificant given the batch appears normal and proceed with standard reporting without mentioning the temperature fluctuation. Option C. Discuss the temperature fluctuation with a colleague to gauge their opinion before deciding whether to report it. Option D. Log the temperature fluctuation as per standard procedure and report it to the quality assurance team for review. The correct answer is D. Log the temperature fluctuation as per standard procedure and report it to the quality assurance team for review. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between operational efficiency and ethical conduct, specifically concerning data integrity and reporting. The Yakult employee is faced with a situation where a deviation from standard procedure, while seemingly minor and potentially beneficial for immediate output, could lead to misrepresentation of product quality or process adherence. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation, ensuring that all actions align with Yakult's commitment to quality and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed deviation to the appropriate supervisor or quality control department. This upholds the principle of honesty and integrity in data reporting, which is a cornerstone of ethical business practice and regulatory compliance. By flagging the issue, the employee ensures that any potential impact on product quality or process integrity is identified, investigated, and addressed according to established protocols. This proactive stance protects both the company's reputation and consumer trust, aligning with the stringent quality standards expected in the food and beverage industry. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the deviation and proceed with the standard reporting, assuming it has no significant impact. This failure violates the ethical duty to report accurately and could lead to the dissemination of misleading information. It also bypasses established quality control mechanisms, potentially masking a systemic issue that could have broader consequences. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to correct the data without proper authorization or documentation. This constitutes data manipulation, which is a serious ethical and regulatory breach, undermining the integrity of all subsequent reporting and potentially leading to severe penalties if discovered. Finally, discussing the deviation with colleagues without reporting it through official channels, while not directly falsifying data, can create an environment of informal communication that bypasses accountability and can lead to inconsistent practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. This involves 1. Identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of the situation. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and procedures. 3. Reporting any observed deviations or potential noncompliance through the designated channels. 4. Seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance officers when unsure. The focus should always be on transparency, accuracy, and upholding the highest standards of professional integrity. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that Yakult's strategic growth initiatives are projected to significantly increase revenue within the next fiscal year. However, this expansion also introduces new operational complexities and potential market vulnerabilities. Considering the regulatory framework governing financial institutions, which approach to assessing the associated risks is most professionally sound and compliant. Option A. Rely primarily on historical risk data and past performance metrics to identify and evaluate potential risks, assuming that future trends will largely mirror past patterns. Option B. Utilize informal discussions with key personnel and anecdotal evidence to gauge the likelihood and impact of potential risks, without a structured or documented assessment process. Option C. Prioritize the achievement of projected revenue targets by allocating resources primarily to revenue-generating activities, with risk assessment being a secondary consideration handled only if significant issues arise. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that incorporates forward-looking analysis of emerging threats, quantifies potential impacts, and develops proactive mitigation strategies aligned with Yakult's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that incorporates forward-looking analysis of emerging threats, quantifies potential impacts, and develops proactive mitigation strategies aligned with Yakult's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maximizing shareholder value and ensuring robust risk management, particularly within the context of a regulated financial institution like Yakult. The pressure to achieve specific financial targets can inadvertently lead to overlooking or downplaying emerging risks, which could have significant long-term consequences for the company's reputation, financial stability, and regulatory standing. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment that integrates emerging risks into the existing framework. This means not just identifying potential threats, but also quantifying their potential impact and developing mitigation strategies. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with regulatory expectations that financial institutions should maintain a forward-looking perspective on risk. Specifically, Regulatory frameworks often mandate that firms have robust systems and controls in place to identify, assess, manage, and monitor risks, including those that are not yet fully materialized but pose a credible threat. This proactive stance helps prevent potential losses and ensures compliance with prudential requirements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data for risk assessment fails to account for evolving market dynamics, technological advancements, or new competitive pressures that could introduce novel risks. This is a regulatory failure because it demonstrates a lack of adherence to the principle of forward-looking risk management, which is a cornerstone of modern financial regulation. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term profit targets over thorough risk evaluation is ethically problematic and a clear regulatory breach. It suggests a culture where financial performance is valued above the safety and soundness of the institution, potentially leading to excessive risk-taking and a disregard for stakeholder interests and regulatory obligations. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or informal discussions for risk identification lacks the rigor and systematic process required by regulators. This can lead to missed risks or an underestimation of their severity, violating the duty to establish and maintain effective risk management systems. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and the firm's risk appetite. This involves establishing clear risk assessment methodologies, ensuring they are regularly updated to capture emerging threats, and fostering a culture where risk identification and reporting are encouraged at all levels. When faced with competing priorities, professionals should escalate concerns to senior management and the board, providing data-driven insights into the potential impact of risks on the firm's strategic objectives and regulatory compliance. Question 15. Compliance review shows that Yakult is considering a new marketing campaign for one of its probiotic beverages, highlighting specific health benefits. The proposed campaign includes statements such as proven to boost your immune system and clinically shown to improve gut health. The marketing team is eager to launch the campaign quickly to capitalize on current consumer interest in wellness products. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential regulatory and ethical implications of this marketing campaign for Yakult? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate the scientific evidence supporting the claims, compare them against relevant regulatory guidelines for health claims, and assess the potential for consumer misinterpretation before campaign approval. Option B. Proceed with the campaign as planned, assuming that general industry practices for wellness products are sufficient and that the claims are broadly acceptable to consumers. Option C. Prioritize rapid campaign launch to gain market advantage, with a plan to address any potential regulatory concerns after the campaign has been running for a few months. Option D. Rely on anecdotal feedback from a small group of existing Yakult consumers who report positive health outcomes as the primary basis for the campaign's health benefit claims. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate the scientific evidence supporting the claims, compare them against relevant regulatory guidelines for health claims, and assess the potential for consumer misinterpretation before campaign approval. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a regulated entity, must ensure its marketing materials are not misleading. The core issue is balancing promotional claims with factual accuracy and regulatory compliance. A deep understanding of the relevant regulatory framework is crucial to avoid potential penalties, reputational damage, and consumer distrust. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that considers the potential for consumer misinterpretation and the alignment of claims with scientific evidence and regulatory guidelines. This approach is professionally sound because it proactively identifies risks before the marketing campaign is launched. It necessitates a review of the proposed claims against established scientific literature and any specific regulations governing health claims for food products. This ensures that Yakult's marketing is both persuasive and compliant, upholding ethical standards and consumer protection principles. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the perceived marketing benefit without a rigorous impact assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory obligations and ethical marketing practices. It risks making unsubstantiated claims, which can lead to regulatory action, fines, and damage to Yakult's brand reputation. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of market entry over thoroughness is also professionally flawed. While efficiency is important, it should not come at the expense of compliance. Rushing the impact assessment can lead to overlooking critical issues, resulting in non-compliant marketing that requires costly remediation later. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or general industry practices without specific validation for Yakult's product is professionally unsound. Regulatory bodies require demonstrable evidence to support health or efficacy claims. Relying on less rigorous forms of validation can expose Yakult to significant regulatory scrutiny and potential sanctions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes identifying potential regulatory breaches, evaluating the likelihood and impact of such breaches, and implementing mitigation strategies. For marketing claims, this means consulting relevant regulatory guidance, seeking expert opinions where necessary, and conducting a thorough review of supporting evidence before dissemination. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new Yakult advertising campaign featuring claims about enhanced immune support could significantly increase market share. However, the scientific substantiation for the specific level of enhancement is borderline and could be interpreted as exaggerated by regulatory bodies. Yakult's marketing department is pushing for immediate implementation due to the projected revenue increase. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible course of action for Yakult? Option A. Proceed with the campaign as planned, assuming regulatory bodies will not scrutinize the claims too closely given the projected benefits to consumer health and Yakult's market position. Option B. Modify the campaign to focus on general well-being benefits of Yakult, which are well-established and less likely to attract regulatory scrutiny, even though this reduces the potential for significant market share growth compared to the original plan. Option C. Launch the campaign with a disclaimer that the claims are based on preliminary findings and subject to further review, hoping this mitigates potential regulatory action. Option D. Delay the campaign and conduct further independent scientific research to definitively substantiate the enhanced immune support claims to a level that is unequivocally compliant with advertising standards, even if this delays market entry and reduces short-term profitability. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the campaign as planned, assuming regulatory bodies will not scrutinize the claims too closely given the projected benefits to consumer health and Yakult's market position. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a regulated entity, must balance the potential financial benefits of a new marketing strategy against its obligations to comply with advertising standards and consumer protection laws. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that any cost-benefit analysis leading to a decision is grounded in a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, rather than solely on projected financial gains. Professional judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks associated with noncompliance, which can lead to significant reputational damage and financial penalties. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical considerations above immediate financial gains. This means that Yakult's marketing team must ensure that any proposed advertising campaign, even if cost-benefit analysis suggests it is financially advantageous, strictly adheres to all relevant advertising codes and consumer protection legislation. This includes ensuring claims are substantiated, not misleading, and do not exploit vulnerable consumer groups. The justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental principles of regulatory adherence and corporate responsibility. Failure to comply can result in enforcement actions, fines, and a loss of consumer trust, which ultimately undermines long-term profitability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost-benefit analysis without adequate regulatory scrutiny is professionally unacceptable. This could manifest as proceeding with a campaign that, while appearing profitable, contains unsubstantiated claims or misleading statements. The regulatory failure here is a direct violation of advertising standards designed to protect consumers from deceptive practices. Another incorrect approach might involve downplaying potential regulatory risks to expedite a campaign, assuming that minor infractions will go unnoticed or can be easily rectified later. This demonstrates a disregard for the proactive nature of regulatory oversight and the potential for severe consequences even from seemingly small breaches. Ethically, such an approach prioritizes profit over consumer welfare and the integrity of the market. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stage review. First, a comprehensive understanding of the relevant regulatory framework must be established. Second, any proposed strategy, including its cost-benefit analysis, should be rigorously assessed against these regulations by individuals with expertise in compliance and legal matters. Third, potential risks of noncompliance should be identified and quantified, not just financially, but also in terms of reputational impact. Finally, decisions should be made only after ensuring that all regulatory and ethical concerns have been adequately addressed, even if it means foregoing a potentially profitable but non-compliant strategy. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential, albeit unconfirmed, issue with a specific batch of Yakult products that may necessitate a recall. What is the most appropriate immediate action for Yakult's management to take in assessing the potential impact of this situation? Option A. Focus solely on the logistical challenges of a potential recall and the cost of replacing affected products, deferring any consideration of broader financial or reputational impacts. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging a potential issue and the possibility of a recall to preempt market speculation, without a detailed impact assessment. Option C. Delay any public or internal assessment until the issue is definitively confirmed and the full extent of the problem is understood to avoid unnecessary alarm. Option D. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to quantify the potential financial and operational impact of a recall, while simultaneously preparing preliminary disclosure statements based on worst-case scenarios. The correct answer is D. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to quantify the potential financial and operational impact of a recall, while simultaneously preparing preliminary disclosure statements based on worst-case scenarios. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a publicly listed company, is subject to stringent reporting requirements and market integrity rules. The need to assess the impact of a potential product recall on financial statements and investor confidence requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for transparency with the potential for market volatility and reputational damage, all while adhering to the specific reporting standards applicable to Yakult's operations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers both quantitative and qualitative factors. This includes evaluating the direct financial costs of the recall, e.g., product disposal, customer refunds, logistics, potential lost sales, and the indirect costs such as reputational damage and increased regulatory scrutiny. This approach aligns with the principles of accurate financial reporting, which mandate that all material events and their potential consequences be disclosed in a timely and transparent manner. Furthermore, it reflects an ethical commitment to stakeholders, ensuring they have the information necessary to make informed decisions. Adherence to the Yakult hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework, which would likely encompass general principles of corporate governance and financial disclosure, is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or delay the disclosure of the recall's impact. This could manifest as a decision to only report the immediate, quantifiable costs without considering the broader implications for future earnings or market perception. Such an approach would fail to meet the regulatory requirement for full and fair disclosure, potentially misleading investors and other stakeholders. Ethically, it represents a breach of trust and could lead to accusations of market manipulation or insider trading if not handled with appropriate transparency. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on mitigating immediate reputational damage through public relations efforts without a corresponding commitment to accurate financial reporting and operational adjustments. This prioritizes short-term image over long-term financial health and regulatory compliance. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the full scope of the potential impact, both financially and reputationally. This involves close collaboration between legal, finance, operations, and communications departments. A robust impact assessment should then inform a clear communication strategy that is both transparent and compliant with all applicable regulations. The decision-making process should prioritize integrity, accuracy, and stakeholder interests, guided by the specific regulatory and ethical standards relevant to Yakult. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that Yakult is considering a new marketing campaign for one of its probiotic products, highlighting its potential health benefits. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with advertising regulations and ethical consumer communication standards? Option A. Proceed with the campaign if the marketing team believes the claims are generally true and beneficial to consumers. Option B. Launch the campaign based on positive feedback from a small group of existing customers, assuming this reflects broader consumer perception. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all proposed marketing materials by Yakult's legal and compliance departments to ensure alignment with applicable advertising laws and guidelines. Option D. Utilize marketing materials from previous campaigns, assuming they remain compliant with current regulations, without further assessment. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the campaign if the marketing team believes the claims are generally true and beneficial to consumers. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Yakult, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must ensure its marketing and product claims are not misleading. The core difficulty lies in balancing promotional efforts with the imperative to adhere to advertising standards and consumer protection laws. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between permissible brand building and potentially deceptive practices. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all proposed marketing materials by Yakult's legal and compliance teams to ensure they align with the specific advertising regulations applicable in the relevant jurisdiction. This proactive step is crucial for preventing regulatory breaches and maintaining consumer trust. Specifically, this approach is right because it directly addresses the requirement for accuracy and substantiation of claims, which are fundamental tenets of consumer protection laws and advertising codes. By seeking expert internal review, Yakult demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to ethical marketing practices, thereby mitigating the risk of misleading consumers and facing penalties. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the marketing team's interpretation of what constitutes a benefit, without independent verification, fails to meet regulatory standards. This is ethically problematic as it prioritizes commercial gain over consumer welfare and can lead to unintentional misrepresentation. Another incorrect approach, which involves launching campaigns based on anecdotal evidence or preliminary research without rigorous validation, is also professionally unacceptable. This disregards the need for substantiated claims, a key requirement in advertising law, and exposes Yakult to significant reputational and legal risks. Finally, an approach that assumes existing marketing materials are automatically compliant without reevaluation for new campaigns is negligent. Regulations evolve, and product claims must be continuously assessed against current legal frameworks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific legal and ethical landscape governing advertising and consumer protection, conducting thorough due diligence on all claims, seeking expert advice when necessary, and maintaining a culture of transparency and honesty in all communications. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates a potential, albeit minor, deviation in the probiotic strain viability for a specific batch of Yakult products. While current internal testing suggests the deviation is within acceptable internal tolerances, there is a possibility it could fall below regulatory minimums upon further scrutiny. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Yakult's quality assurance team? Option A. Continue with standard product distribution while closely monitoring consumer feedback for any adverse reports related to the affected batch. Option B. Focus on enhancing public relations messaging to reinforce Yakult's commitment to quality, assuming the internal tolerances are sufficient. Option C. Immediately halt distribution of the affected batch and conduct extensive internal testing to definitively confirm or refute the deviation before any external communication. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis and prepare for proactive engagement with relevant regulatory authorities regarding the potential deviation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis and prepare for proactive engagement with relevant regulatory authorities regarding the potential deviation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations, particularly when dealing with potential product quality issues that could impact consumer safety and public trust in Yakult. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any response to the identified issue is both effective in addressing the problem and fully compliant with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the root cause of the potential quality deviation, followed by a proactive and transparent communication strategy with regulatory bodies and stakeholders, as mandated by consumer protection laws and good manufacturing practices. This ensures that any risks are mitigated, consumer safety is prioritized, and Yakult's commitment to quality is upheld, thereby maintaining its reputation and adhering to its ethical obligations. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost saving over thorough investigation risks overlooking critical quality defects, potentially leading to widespread consumer harm and severe regulatory penalties. This failure to adequately address the issue violates the principle of consumer safety and could result in significant reputational damage and legal repercussions for Yakult. Another incorrect approach that involves withholding information from regulatory authorities, even with the intention of resolving the issue internally first, constitutes a breach of disclosure requirements. Regulatory bodies expect prompt and honest reporting of potential product quality concerns to enable them to assess risks and guide corrective actions. Such concealment undermines trust and can lead to more severe consequences if the issue is discovered independently. A further incorrect approach that focuses solely on public relations without a substantive investigation and corrective action plan fails to address the underlying problem. While managing public perception is important, it cannot substitute for genuine efforts to ensure product safety and quality. This approach is ethically unsound and likely to be viewed as deceptive by regulators and consumers if the issue persists or is later revealed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential issue, assessing its severity and scope, and then consulting the relevant regulatory guidelines and internal policies. The next step involves initiating a robust investigation, documenting all findings, and engaging with regulatory bodies proactively and transparently. This structured approach ensures that all actions are defensible, compliant, and aligned with the company's ethical responsibilities and commitment to consumer well-being. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that Yakult is considering a new marketing campaign that emphasizes the unique fermentation process of its probiotic drinks. The proposed campaign includes claims about enhanced gut health benefits that are supported by internal research, but have not yet undergone independent peer review. The marketing team believes the campaign's innovative messaging will significantly boost sales. What is the most appropriate course of action for Yakult to ensure compliance with regulatory and ethical standards? Option A. Launch the campaign immediately to gain a competitive advantage and address any potential regulatory concerns after the initial sales surge. Option B. Proceed with the campaign as planned, as the internal research provides sufficient justification for the claims and the innovative messaging is expected to drive sales. Option C. Develop a revised campaign that clearly states the limitations of the research supporting the health claims and focuses on general well-being rather than specific, unverified benefits. Option D. Modify the campaign to include comparative claims against other probiotic products, highlighting the perceived superiority of Yakult's fermentation process, even if direct scientific comparisons are not readily available. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the campaign as planned, as the internal research provides sufficient justification for the claims and the innovative messaging is expected to drive sales. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Yakult employees due to the inherent conflict between fostering innovation and maintaining strict adherence to regulatory compliance and ethical marketing practices. The pressure to develop novel promotional strategies must be balanced against the imperative to avoid misleading consumers or engaging in unfair competitive practices, all within the specific regulatory framework governing the food and beverage industry in the relevant jurisdiction. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any new initiative aligns with both the company's commercial objectives and its legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Yakult's proposed promotional campaign against the specific advertising standards and consumer protection laws applicable in its operating jurisdiction. This includes verifying that all claims made about the product's benefits are substantiated by scientific evidence and are presented in a clear, unambiguous manner that does not mislead consumers about the product's efficacy or intended use. Ethical considerations also demand that the campaign does not unfairly target vulnerable populations or exploit consumer anxieties. Adherence to these principles ensures that Yakult operates with integrity, builds consumer trust, and avoids potential regulatory sanctions or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the novelty and potential market impact of the campaign, without adequate regulatory scrutiny, risks violating advertising standards. For instance, making unsubstantiated health claims about Yakult's probiotic benefits would be a direct contravention of consumer protection laws designed to prevent misleading advertising. Another incorrect approach might involve comparing Yakult's product to competitors in a way that disparages their offerings without factual basis, which could constitute unfair competition. Furthermore, a campaign that relies on exaggerated or sensationalized messaging, even if not directly false, could be deemed unethical and detrimental to consumer confidence, potentially leading to regulatory investigations and penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive risk assessment. This involves identifying potential regulatory pitfalls and ethical concerns early in the campaign development process. A multidisciplinary review involving legal, marketing, and compliance teams is crucial. The framework should mandate that all promotional materials undergo a rigorous vetting process to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and ethical guidelines before dissemination. This proactive approach safeguards the company's reputation and ensures sustainable business practices.